I've got one of those stories that starts with a boss who treated my existence like a placeholder and ends with the kind of justice that keeps you warm at night. 15 years grinding in the gears of a defense contractor that felt like it was running on fumes and bad intentions. We were supposed to be the backbone of national security, but the reality was far grimmer. Appeasement. My boss Todd was the human equivalent of a participation trophy. He moved through the office like he was the lead actor in a movie nobody asked for, a lukewarm coffee in hand, pretending to understand the blueprints we spent our lives perfecting. He loved using words like family and synergy right before he threw someone under the bus to save his own fusant. One Monday, Todd really outdid himself. We were preparing a massive shipment for a high-stakes government client, a project that took months of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Big. Because Todd decided to take a brilliant shortcut to impress the regional director, he sent the entire technical dossier to the wrong department. The shipment stalled, the client was livid. Facent. And the company was looking at a massive penalty. When the news broke, did Todd take the heat? Of course not. He stood in the middle of the floor, his face arranged in a mask of somber disappointment, and announced that the incident had cost the company dearly. Guys, he said, that fake patronizing tone hitting the air like a lead balloon. This error is a direct hit to our bottom line. Thing. Stenfer. And since we're a family, we all share the burden. He informed us that everyone's paycheck would be adjusted, which was his way of saying he was stealing our earnings to cover his own incompetence. Easy. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bones. Finally, Ben, one of the guys who had been there longer than anyone, raised a trembling hand. Sir, with all due respect, that error came from the front office, not the floor. Thing did. Todd didn't even blink. Ben, I don't need excuses. We're a family. Sometimes family members have to sacrifice for the greater good. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips, as if challenging me to do something about it. You dat. I kept my mouth shut, but inside I was already writing my exit plan. The company was a graveyard of broken machines and broken spirits. Thing. It's this, we had an assembly line that looked like a prop from a horror film, with equipment older than my grandfather. Every time it rattled, we waited for it to breathe its last. Fearnham. Todd the visionary that he was refused to authorize any repairs. It adds character, he'd say, laughing at his own joke, while the rest of us worked in fear of a workplace accident. Friday. One Friday, after it spent 12 hours trying to coax that metal monster into functioning, Todd walked by on his way to his golf outing. Good hustle, champ, he said, not even looking at the grease staining my arms. Perfect. Maybe one day you'll learn how to work smart instead of hard. That was the spark, the real one. I had been working on a secret, independent project for months, a software integration system that would make those ancient machines hum like a symphony. I wasn't doing it for the company, I was doing it because I couldn't stand the mediocrity anymore. Thing. When the time was right, I didn't just quit. I initiated the transition. I took my project, my expertise, and my network with me. Todd didn't even notice I was gone until the biggest government contract of the year 01. $6 million deal. I had single-handedly built fell through because the only person who knew how to bridge the gap was me. I didn't leave him a note. I left him a message in the system logs that spelled out his failure in code. Fiend. Now I run my own consulting firm. I make triple what Todd ever dreamed of earning, and I treat my team like actual human beings. Last month, I saw Todd at a trade show. Kingston. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered, holding a cheap plastic trophy his company had given him for 10 years of service. He walked up to me, trying to reclaim some version of his old authority, but it fell flat before he even opened his mouth. Hey, kid, he started, his voice lacking its old loud bravado. Think you could look at our current system? We're having some adjustments. I looked at him, smiled the exact same way he used to smile at me, and kept walking. Karma isn't just a concept. It's a paycheck, and it's always on time. Fair buys. Integration program was my new assignment, translating complex engineering requirements into functional systems while juggling impossible deadlines. Uncooperative suppliers and a boss who couldn't distinguish a circuit board from a toaster, that was my daily reality. My team was compact. 4 brilliant engineers, 1 creative designer, and 2 administrative pillars. They were incredibly sharp, yet visibly hollowed out by years of suffocating micromanagement. During our first meeting, I laid my cards on the table. I told them clearly that I was not Todd. Fitting. I made it known that I had no interest in ego trips, public humiliation, or stealing the labor of those working beneath me. I promised them that if they gave me their best work, I would protect them from the fallout. The visible wave of relief that washed over them confirmed exactly what kind of toxic leadership they had been enduring. Initially, the machine hummed with efficiency. Feared it. I was invigorated organizing workflows, clearing obstacles, and finally finding joy in engineering again. However, whenever we hit a significant milestone, Todd would miraculously materialize. He would drift into the conference room, just long enough to deliver his signature line. Good work, team, but we can do better. It didn't matter if we had achieved perfection, he treated do better like a pre-recorded message. Viewed. One afternoon after we delivered the entire system architecture, 2 weeks ahead of schedule, I sent the final report to his desk. His response was a single stinging sentence. Looks okay, but let's aim higher next time. Higher than 2 weeks early. Maybe I should invent cold fusion on my lunch break while I'm at it. Then the true trial began, the testing phase. We relocated to the Nevada desert for 3 grueling weeks to oversee the system integration. The days were endless, the heat was suffocating, and the coffee tasted like recycled battery acid. Victory. I spent most of my time fighting fires, fixing hardware that should have been retired when the Berlin Wall fell. The Air Force observers were watching like hawks, and the tension was heavy enough to crush a man. Phaeton. Todd predictably remained safely tucked away in his climate-controlled office, calling once a day to ask if we had it handled. The second week brought us to the edge of catastrophe. Thumb test. The primary control system suffered a catastrophic failure. The screens went black, the emergency alarms screamed, and our Air Force liaison captain Re-Eyes Pfingst looked at me with the silent judgment of a man who had just seen a multi-million-dollar jet go up in smoke. If that system wasn't operational by sunrise, we would be in breach of contract. I ordered my team to go eat and try to find some sleep. I'll handle this, I told them despite my own exhaustion. They didn't want to leave, but they knew I wouldn't let them stay. For the next 10 hours, I existed solely on vending machine crackers and pure adrenaline. I ripped through lines of corrupted code, replaced fried modules, physically rebuilt the core control unit using spare parts from the scrap pile. Around 5:30 a.m., as the Nevada horizon began to bleed into an orange glow, the system finally flickered to life. Free sequence initialized perfectly. No errors. No glitches. I collapsed back into my chair, letting out a laugh that bordered on hysteria. I hadn't slept in 36 hours, but we were back in the game. When Captain Rise arrived and saw the system running flawlessly, his jaw practically hit the floor. "You fixed this all by yourself?" he asked, genuinely stunned. "Yeah," I replied, rubbing the grit from my eyes. "It needed doing." He laughed, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You just saved us months of bureaucratic hell." The news traveled fast. By noon, our project was the talk of the entire site. The Air Force sent a glowing official commendation to upper management, explicitly praising my leadership and technical problems, solving. Guess who decided to make an appearance 2 days later? Bunag. Todd strolled into the facility wearing aviator sunglasses as if he were starring in a low-budget action movie. He started shaking hands with everyone, acting like the hero of the hour. Thingachi. During our next briefing, he stood up and declared our team did a stellar job recovering from that minor incident. Captain Rise cut him off before he could even finish the sentence. Ewan said, his voice cold, "Your engineer here fixed it, single-handedly." We were incredibly impressed by his work. Todd's face turned a shade of purple. I hadn't realized was possible for a human. "Ah, yes," he stammered. "And good work. Great teamwork." He wouldn't Meet my eyes for the rest of the day. When we wrapped up the final testing, the Air Force signed off with zero defects. The project went live, and 6 months later, it generated over $1.6 million in new contracts. The company even filed a patent listing me as the primary inventor for the subsystems I designed, a first for them in years. They plastered the success all over the corporate newsletter, whose name wasn't mentioned a single time. Yep, even with the corporate games, I felt a sense of pride. My team was stronger, they stood taller, and they finally believed in their own talent again. I made sure they received credit, even if I had to write the recommendation emails myself. Our success led to a nomination for the Department of Defense Contractor Technical Team of the Year award. Few months later, we were flown to D.C. for the ceremony. The ceremony coincided with the season of annual performance reviews. Todd attended, of course, preening, as if he were the mastermind behind the entire operation. Phew. I kept my mouth shut and smiled, knowing everyone in that room understood who had actually done the heavy lifting. By the time we returned, I was certain this was my year. After some sleepless nights, the $1 million project, the patent, and the award, there was no way they could deny my promotion. I walked into Todd's office, feeling like I was finally about to be compensated for my true worth. You had no idea how wrong I was. Performance reviews always felt like waiting for a judge's verdict, except the result determined whether you'd be living in a house or a tent. I sat across from Todd, who looked unusually cheery, as if he'd just discovered he could win by cheating. He tapped his pen against the desk and said, well, you've had quite the year, haven't you? I guess so, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I had spearheaded a $1 million project, secured a patent, saved the contract, and earned a Dodd nomination. That didn't warrant a promotion. Nothing would. He flipped through my review papers as if he were reading a takeout menu. You're a real asset to this company, he said, nodding with a hollow smile. 10 out of 10 on every performance metric. Truly outstanding work. I leaned back, waiting for the part where he offered the promotion. He looked up, his eyes cold and devoid of sincerity. So we've decided on a 3 raise. I blinked, sure I hadn't heard him correctly. 3. He nodded, leaning forward as if he were doing me a massive favor. Same as everyone else. Hey Reddit, listen to this story about how I finally taught my toxic boss the hardest lesson of his career. It all started on a mundane Monday morning, a day that felt like every other day inside the gray, windowless office of our defense contracting firm. My boss, Todd, had called me into his office, and I was actually excited, waiting for the "so we're promoting you" part. I sat there looking up at him, wearing a hopeful, genuine smile. So your raise will be 3, he said, his voice casual. I blinked, genuinely confused, wondering if I had heard him correctly. He nodded, looking pleased with himself, as if he had just handed me the keys to the city. Same as everyone else. He explained, consistency across the board. You know we value fairness here. I had made that company $1.6 million new revenue that fiscal year alone. I was the singular reason they secured that high-profile National Defense Award nomination. I was the guy, and the promotion? I asked, my voice steady but careful. Feared. He sighed, leaning back, pretending to be deep in thought. Yeah, about that. We decided to promote Kevin instead. Kevin, my junior engineer, the guy I personally trained, the guy who still struggled with basic coding. Felt my stomach drop into a cold, dark abyss. Wait, you promoted someone on my team? I asked, struggling to keep my voice down. He nodded again, dismissive and cold. Great. But Kevin showed initiative, and you'll get your turn, just try harder next year. That specific line, try harder next year. Favor. I had heard him say it to others before, but hearing it aimed at me felt like a physical punch to the gut. I sat there frozen, staring at him, waiting for him to crack a smile and say he was just kidding. He didn't. My hands tightened around the armrests of the chair until my knuckles turned white. Sir, with all due respect, I led the team that secured that multi-million-dollar contract. I said, my voice trembling with contained rage. I worked every single weekend. I traveled 100 days last year, and I fixed a total system failure alone when the entire department panicked. What exactly would trying harder look like? He leaned back, putting on that fake, patronizing fatherly tone he used to manipulate people. It's not just about what you do, it's about what management sees, he said. Maybe next year you focus more on visibility. Function. He meant sucking up to the right people, playing the office politics game and making sure he got credit for my genius. And as if the insult wasn't enough, he stood up, grinning like a greasy used car salesman. You. Oh, and I've got something for you, he said, walking over to the corner of his office. He grabbed a massive heavy box and shoved it toward me. It was a printer. Brand new still, wrapped in its plastic, factory sealed. For me? Things. I asked, completely confused and disgusted. Yeah, he said proudly, acting like he was a hero. You've been asking for better tools, so I figured this would make your life easier. Consider it. A thank you gift. A thank you printer. Thinged. I had built $1 million product for his department, and my reward was office equipment that would barely last a year. The irony was so sharp, so painful that I couldn't help but laugh. So I did. Frowned. Wow, I said, a dark smile forming on my face. Guess I'll print out all my disappointment in high resolution now. Even get the joke. He just patted my shoulder with a heavy, patronizing hand and said, "Keep up the good work, champ." By the time I left his office, my head was pounding with a migraine that felt like a drill. Stopped by Char, thinking maybe they would be rational and confirm it was a mistake. They didn't. The HR manager looked at me with that rehearsed, soulless pity face. Promotions are based on multiple factors, she said, reciting a script. You're definitely on track for next year. Next year. Always next year. When I got back to my desk, the whole team was deathly quiet. They had already heard the news. Kevin looked embarrassed, looking down at his screen like he didn't even want the promotion he didn't earn. Hey man, he said softly, avoiding my eyes. You deserved it more. Forced a tight fake smile. Don't worry about it. But something inside of me finally broke, not in a loud, dramatic movie way. Thank you. Just that quiet, cold, freezing feeling you get when you realize your years of loyalty mean absolutely nothing to people who don't value your worth. I went home early that day. My wife took one look at my face and asked, "Bad day?" Reason. "Bad year," I said, and then I told her everything. I told her about the praise, the $1 million revenue, the crumbs, and the insulting printer. She just shook her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. Stay there forever. You know, she said, you're not a doormat, and you're worth so much more than this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept replaying Todd's words over and over. Try harder next year. Thanks. The same man who stole credit, avoided every shred of responsibility, and couldn't even fix a paper jam was telling me to try harder. The next morning, I walked into work and looked around at everyone's exhausted, beaten-down faces. Thinged. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. The ancient machine in the corner wheezed like it was still angry about surviving another miserable week. UG. And Todd was in his office, as always, pretending to be busy while reading the news. That was the moment I realized that loyalty in that place was a own-way street leading to nowhere. Egan. We were all just rusted, discarded gears in Todd's failing machine and me. I was officially done being part of his broken system. No more free overtime. No more proving myself to a man who didn't deserve my time. From that day on, I decided if they weren't going to value me, I would start planning for someone who would. But first, I had to make it through another week, sitting across from the man who gave me a printer instead of a promotion. Fins. After that meeting, something in my brain just flipped. I stopped caring. All those late nights, skipped lunches, and weekends I had spent saving projects from disaster. Over. Thing. I started clocking in at 8 o'clock sharp and clocking out at 4 o'clock sharp. Not a single minute extra. Not a single minute early. If a meeting ran late, I would stand up mid-sentence and say, "Sorry, at 40 hours for the week," and then walk out the door. The first time I did that, Todd's face looked like someone had just unplugged his massive ego. "Where are you going?" He barked, his face turning red. "Fixin'." "Home," I said, not even looking back. My shift ended. He blinked, looking shocked like he couldn't believe I dared to speak to him that way. We're a team, remember? He shouted.
Feud.
Yeah, I said, grabbing my bag, and the teams clocked out. From that point on, I was completely checked out. No volunteering for extra testing. No staying up late to fix his incompetence.
Pretending to be motivated by his werefamsely speeches.
My new motto was, do exactly what I'm paid for not an inch more. And the best part, my productivity didn't even drop.
Think.
Turns out when you cut out pointless, soul-sucking meetings and fake corporate urgency, you can get a massive amount of work done in 40 hours. Coworkers started to notice the change.
Fix it.
Man, you seem so much calmer, one said while we were in the lab. You used to look like you were fighting off a nervous breakdown every single day.
Fired from Karen.
I said, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of peace. He laughed, but later that day, he stopped by my desk and leaned in, lowering his voice.
All this happened before
He said, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Guy named Harold. Same story. Worked his tail off, saved. A project got passed over for a promotion.
Vent.
And the boss told him to try harder next year. He left 6 months later and doubled his salary somewhere else. I looked at him, my heart pounding. Did Todd do it to him too? Yep, he said.
Fods.
Got a specific pattern. He promotes the easy, compliant ones, not the good ones. It makes him feel safer, like he's in control. That hit harder than I expected.
Vent.
I wasn't just another case of bad luck or a misunderstood employee. I was part of a toxic, repetitive cycle. Todd's little system was designed to keep good employees just demotivated enough to stay put, but not enough to quit. Don't waste years waiting for him to change. The guy said, patting my shoulder. Start looking seriously. That night, I did something different. I opened my laptop, polished my resume, and started hunting for the exit.
Fend.
I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to leave on my own terms with a move, so calculated it would shake Todd's world.
Figim.
I spent the next 3 months documenting every single project. I saved every system I built, and every time Todd had failed to execute. I was building a paper trail, not for them, but for the company leadership above Todd.
You know.
The reality was the Airborne Defense Integration Program relied entirely on my work, and Todd was just the mouthpiece taking the glory. One Friday, an opportunity appeared.
Fusion.
The Department of Defense requested a surprise audit of our technical team's performance. Todd, being the lazy, incompetent manager he was, tried to delegate the entire report to me, acting like it was just another busy task.
Fixed.
Make sure the data looks good, champ, he said, handing me the folder. This was it. This was the opening I needed to show the world exactly who was responsible for the success and the failure of the department.
Front.
I spent the entire weekend working, but not on the projects. I worked on the audit report. I embedded notes, project timestamps, and direct logs of communication that showed me fixing Todd's errors.
Thinked.
Me managing the budget that he constantly overspent, and me leading the team he claimed to manage. I didn't lie. I just presented the cold, hard, unvarnished truth.
Feud.
Monday morning, the audit team arrived, led by a high-ranking captain. They sat in the conference room, the air thick with tension. Todd sat at the head of the table, smiling, ready to take credit for all of it.
Figden.
And how have you managed the recent integration issues? The captain asked, looking directly at Todd. Todd stammered, his usual confidence evaporating. Well, you know it was a team effort, but we have a solid strategy in place.
Engine frowned.
Opened the report I had meticulously prepared and started flipping through the pages. The room grew silent. This data says otherwise, Mr. Todd. The captain said, his voice cold.
Fiend.
It says here that for the last 2 years you have been absent for the critical decision-making processes. And that all of these successes were carried by this gentleman here. The captain pointed directly at me.
Face went white, then purple.
That's not accurate. Todd stuttered, sweating profusely. I am the lead on this project. You were the lead. The captain corrected him, his eyes sharp. Until today.
Think.
The captain looked at me. We were told that the technical integrity of this project was being compromised by management. And it seems the evidence confirms that. Todd tried to interrupt, but the captain stood up. Mr.
Bates.
Todd, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. The silence in the room was deafening. Todd stood there shaking his ego completely shattered in front of the entire team.
He tried to say something, but he couldn't find the words. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh.
I just sat there. It wasn't a movie moment, but it was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. He gathered his things looking like a ghost of his former self and was escorted out by security. The captain turned to the team, then looked at me. I need someone to step up and lead this transition, he said. Are you ready?
Please.
I looked around the room, seeing my coworkers, the ones who had been suffering under Todd's rule for years. I am, I said. The promotion wasn't just a title. It was the recognition of years of invisible backbreaking labor.
Being.
But the real twist happened the following week. I found out that, because I had built the entire defense system from the ground up, the company couldn't afford to lose me.
Zhang.
And they offered me a massive track to stay as an independent consultant. I was now in charge. I was making triple the salary, and I was finally in a position where I could fire people who didn't respect the work.
You.
I walked into the office on Monday morning, the same office that once felt like a prison. The lights seemed brighter. The air felt clearer.
Then.
I walked past my old desk, now occupied by someone new, and went straight to the manager's office. I sat in the chair the one Todd had sat in for years, and looked out the window.
Fuse.
I realized then that success isn't about being the loudest or the one who takes the most credit. It's about knowing your worth, waiting for the right moment.
This.
And never ever letting any no matter how much they think they own you tell you that you need to try harder. I took a deep breath, opened the company portal, and started drafting an email to the entire department.
It was time to fix the broken system.
One person at a time. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered, and I was the one who signed for it.
Fix you.
The journey from a printer to a partnership had been long and grueling, but as I looked at the screen, I knew one thing for sure. I would never ever be a gear in someone else's broken machine again.
You.
The office was quiet. Now the tension of the previous years had finally dissolved into a productive, respectful atmosphere. I hired Kevin as my assistant, not because I felt pity for him, but because he was actually a good,
Feud.
humble guy who just needed someone to show him the right way. We worked on projects that actually mattered, and for the first time we felt like we were really changing the world.
Bert.
And every once in a while, it'd look at that old dusty printer in the storage room and chuckle.
Feces.
It was the best, most expensive gift Ed ever received because it gave me the clarity I needed to see that it was time to move on and build my own empire. The lesson was simple.
You are the smartest person in the room. It's time to change rooms.
And that is exactly what I did. I didn't just get even, I got ahead. I got everything I deserved, and more importantly, I got my self-respect back.
You're in a job where you feel like a gear. Remember my story.
Don't wait for them to appreciate you because they never will. Value yourself. First, document your wins, and when the time is right, make your move.
Fume.
Because in the end, it's not about the printer, it's about your future. And your future is worth so much more than anyone's empty promises. Stay sharp, keep working hard, but make sure you're working for the right person. Yourself.
Dictionary.
The story of the printer and the promotion is just a reminder that even in the toughest, most toxic environments, you have the power to flip the script.
Feature.
All it takes is a little bit of patience, a lot of documentation, and the courage to finally say, I'm done. And trust me, that's the best feeling in the world.
You.
Hey, Reddit, let me tell you about a little realization I had regarding the cycle of professional sabotage.
Thing.
Todd had this genius twisted system of keeping his top performers just demotivated enough that they'd feel too exhausted to leave. Don't waste your years waiting, kid. The guy had told me once, masking his insults as advice.
These.
Start looking elsewhere if you aren't happy. Seriously, I took his advice to heart. That night, I did something completely different. Instead of dragging myself home to doom scroll through those toxic company emails, I cracked open the internal training portal. The company possessed this obscure professional development fund that almost nobody ever touched.
Thing.
Todd never mentioned it because he was terrified of spending even a single dime on us.
The money was there.
And technically, every single employee was entitled to use it for certifications, software training, or technical workshops. So I decided to go all in
Find up.
for advanced CAD, simulation complex, 3D, modeling and high-level systems design courses. I even hunted down a niche certification in finite element analysis that I'd been dying to master for years.
Thing.
Every single course was billed directly to the company, and because the system was archaic, the approvals went through automatically because nobody was actually watching the accounts.
Fuse.
By the second week, my daily schedule looked entirely different. I did my assigned work strictly during business hours, clocked out the second the clock hit 5,
Find.
and spent my evenings soaking up knowledge that would make me twice as valuable to someone else. Todd barely noticed. He was far too busy hovering over everyone else's shoulders, micromanaging the life out of the department.
Finge.
If a staff member spent an extra minute in the restroom, he'd grill them on what critical business they were conducting. If a single component was delayed, he'd call 3 mandatory meetings to pinpoint whose head to put on a pike, never once realizing the bottleneck was his own incompetence. One Monday morning, he stomped past my cubicle and frowned at the heavy textbook splayed open next to my laptop. "What exactly is all that?"
He barked.
Pointing a judgmental finger. "Training material, Todd," I said, keeping my tone perfectly casual. "Company approved." His face twisted. He clearly hated the sound of that.
You be laser focused on your current projects.
It's not wasting your time on niche stuff you'll never actually use. "Don't you worry, boss," I said, offering him a thin smile. "It's for professional growth.
Tell us, we're a family, right?
Just trying to make the family stronger." He grunted his face, turning a deep shade of crimson, and marched away,
Vasion.
muttering under his breath about how ungrateful employees were these days. The most satisfying part of doing the bare minimum was witnessing how much it drove him up the wall.
Fangden.
He'd hunt for any excuse to guilt trip me into taking on more, saying things like, "The client is screaming for faster updates," or "We could really use your expertise on this new bid."
Function.
But I just nod calmly and say, "Sorry, Todd, I'm at full capacity." It made his blood boil. One Friday, he finally cornered me in the quiet hallway.
Feuds.
"Look," he said, dropping his voice into a fake conspiratorial tone like we were having some deep heart-to-heart. "I know, you're still stewing about the promotion, but that's just how business works. You can't just shut down on me."
Mild. Feeling a sense of calm he'd never known before.
"I'm not shut down, Todd. I'm just working efficiently." He didn't get it, and he never would. Truly believed that control was a form of respect, and it killed him to realize he no longer held the leash. Meanwhile, my coworker Ben kept checking in on my progress. "How's the secret training going?"
Vent.
he whispered one afternoon. "It's incredible," I said. "Turns out I'm significantly better at teaching myself than waiting for management to figure out how to lead." He grinned, clearly catching my drift.
Really planning your exit, aren't you?
I didn't answer with words, I just gave him a knowing smirk. The next few months were a blur of accomplishment, as I quietly stacked certifications like championship trophies.
Every single time.
I completed a course, I updated my resume with surgical precision. I didn't say a word to anyone, except Ben, the one guy who'd kept my spirits up. He'd just give me a thumbs up and say good.
Fend.
Make them regret losing you. By the end of the quarter, I held more specialized qualifications than most of the senior engineers in the entire building. Todd still hadn't noticed a thing. He was still too busy nitpicking the font sizes and formatting on our status reports. It was absolute irony.
Same training fund.
He had hidden from everyone, was becoming the golden ticket for the one guy he should have fought the hardest to keep. And I wasn't just building skills anymore. I was building a fortress. Training programs turned out to be far more useful than I had ever dared to dream. They weren't just about software. They were massive networking gold mines.
Beth.
Every session was packed with high-level engineers from other firms, including our direct competitors and contractors, bidding for the same lucrative government work we were chasing. That's exactly where I met Mark,
Senior systems engineer from a rival firm.
a guy with a calm, commanding voice and eyes that caught everything. He was the kind of professional who didn't waste a single word.
Sitting side by side.
during a grueling, week-long advanced simulation course. Between the lectures and the coffee breaks, we started swapping war stories about workplace disasters.
Thing.
Nightmare bosses and half-broken machines that were held together by duct tape and prayers. When I briefly mentioned, Todd Mark just let out a sharp, genuine laugh.
We guess he takes credit for your successes and calls it teamwork.
Exactly, I said, stunned by how well he knew the script. You know his type. Oh, I've met thousands of them. Mark said, his smile cold and knowing.
Be the she.
They're usually the reason high performers like you eventually end up working for people like me. Dot. That comment grabbed my attention like nothing else ever had.
Few days.
He he dropped subtle hints about his company's expansion, how they were hunting for people who understood defense systems and didn't mind taking a seat at the leadership table.
Explicitly say apply, but he didn't need to.
I could read between the lines perfectly. Word of advice, he said one afternoon as we were packing up our laptops.
Things in.
Waste another second trying to prove your worth to someone who decided you were beneath him before you even walked in the door. When you're truly good at what you do, the right people will always take notice.
Fish.
I held on to those words like a mantra for the entire flight home. Back at the office, the atmosphere felt suffocatingly stagnant.
Few.
Todd was still doing his daily rounds, nitpicking every report and manufacturing fake emergencies to keep the team on edge. The rest of the crew just folded under his pressure because they were terrified of losing their paychecks.
Friend.
The only difference was me. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I was free. Kevin, the guy who had been promoted over me, stopped by my desk one afternoon. He looked completely broken, dark circles under his eyes.
Fiendin.
I honestly envy you, he whispered. You seem so unbothered by everything. I just got tired of playing a rigged game, Kevin, I replied. What's going on with you?
Few do.
He sighed, glancing over his shoulder to make sure Todd wasn't listening. They're forcing me into this mandatory MBA program. They said it's required if I want to keep my senior title.
Finged.
But there's a catch, he continued, his voice shaking. I have to sign a contract to stay here for 5 years after I finish, or I have to pay back every cent of the tuition. That explained everything perfectly.
You.
They had handed him that promotion as a pair of golden handcuffs, and he hadn't even realized he was being shackled.
Say it out loud.
But I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had no chains, no fake promises, and no debt to the company. I could walk out the door whenever I felt like it. A few weeks later, I finally got my chance to see exactly how much Todd would tolerate before his fragile ego finally snapped. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was heavy like the air right before a thunderstorm hits.
Sat there.
His eyes darting across my face as if he were looking for a sign that I was bluffing, that this was some elaborate prank. But I stood there, stone-faced, my posture relaxed for the first time in 3 years.
Fume.
He looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb he was afraid to detonate. You're making a mistake. He finally spat out, his voice thin and cracking at the edges. The industry is small, you know.
Think so.
I leaned against his doorframe, arms crossed, feeling a strange sense of liberation washing over me. It is Todd, I replied, my voice steady and calm.
Exactly why I know. You won't be able to replace me for half the price.
You're paying now. His face turned a shade of purple that I had only ever seen when he was screaming at the interns.
Fiat.
He opened his mouth to retort, but stopped, realizing the leverage. He thought he held the threats, the corporate jargon, the fake camaraderie had vanished into thin air. Are you done?
Fan 6.
Checking my watch, making a point of showing him that his time was no longer mine. He didn't answer. He just looked down at his desk, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for a pen he didn't need.
Fithen.
I turned around, walked out of his office, and closed the door with a soft final click. Walking back to my desk, I felt like a man who had finally taken off a lead-lined coat he didn't realize he was wearing. I began clearing my personal belongings, not rushing, just savoring every moment.
Duck.
One by one, I packed my things. The worn-out notebook, the extra chargers, and yes,
Fanged.
I even picked up that cheap plastic printer He had gifted one that had served as his pathetic bonus for all those sleepless nights. I looked at it, laughed under my breath, and dumped it right into the trash bin by the exit.
E.T.
It was heavy, it was useless, and leaving it behind felt like dropping the last anchor of my past life.
Affection.
Just as I was about to head to the part department Kevin guy who had been too afraid to ever cross Todd walked by looking bewildered. "Wait, is it true?" he whispered, his eyes wide.
Really walking out on him just like that.
I looked at Kevin, seeing the same exhaustion I had felt for years etched into his features.
Kevin.
I said, leaning in slightly. "Don't stay, because you're afraid of the unknown. The unknown is infinitely better than a place that doesn't respect your worth." He didn't have an answer for that, but the way he looked at the empty desk beside me told me he was thinking about it.
You nuts.
I made my way to Shiar, signed the final documents with a pen that didn't feel like it belonged to a prison warden, and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun.
Haven't.
The transition to Aerodyne systems was seamless, a sharp contrast to the chaotic mismanagement I had left behind. Lisa met me at the front desk on my first day, smiling like she was genuinely happy to see me, because as I soon learned, she actually was. "We've got your terminal set up," she said, guiding me through a clean, high-tech workspace.
Finged.
"And the team is already excited to hear your perspective on the new integration project." It was night and day. No one was screaming in the hallways. No one was holding back information to play power games.
Feud.
And the actual technical work, was challenging and meaningful. 2 months later, I received an email from an old contact back at my former office. The subject line was just, "The ship is sinking."
Finged.
I opened it curious and read through the details. It turned out that without me, the main defense system had hit a critical snag during a routine diagnostic.
Fington.
Todd, in his infinite arrogance, had tried to fix it himself just like he always claimed he could. He had essentially locked the system, corrupted the firmware, and cost the company a massive contract penalty.
Fengshent.
The board had finally stepped in, and he was currently under investigation for incompetence. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair from my new office, overlooking the city skyline, and let out a long, slow breath.
Freight.
There was no malice in my reaction, only a profound, quiet satisfaction. The justice wasn't something I had to fight for anymore.
Thingda.
It was just the natural consequence of someone who thought they were indispensable discovering. They were actually the dead weight all along. I typed a short reply to my contact, closed the email, and turned back to my monitor.
Futin.
I had a team to lead, a system to optimize, and for the first time in a decade, I was truly excited about what tomorrow would bring.
Just an employee.
Anymore. I was a professional who knew exactly who I was and what I brought to the table. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about Todd one last time.
Fing.
He was probably still sitting in that same office, staring at a screen he didn't understand, wondering where it all went wrong. But that was no longer my concern.
Finged.
I had walked away from the golden handcuffs and found that the world was much larger, brighter, and more rewarding than I had ever dared to hope.
Fingsa then.
Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stop playing the game by their rules.
Thinksit.
And as the day wound down, I realized that for the first time in years, I was going home with a clear mind and a heavy heart, not of burdens, but of gratitude. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living.
Fingside.
Hey, Reddit, listen to this. I walked into the office on a Friday, and the atmosphere was heavier than lead.
Feeble.
Todd, my manager at Aerodyne Systems, was sitting there with that signature smug look he always wore when he thought he was holding all the cards. "Are you really doing this?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension.
Feel.
"You're going to walk away after we invested so much in your training." I looked him dead in the eye and didn't blink. "You mean the certification courses I found and enrolled in on my own dime?"
Secret education fund you guys swore didn't exist.
His face turned a shade of purple I hadn't seen before. "You are being incredibly ungrateful," he hissed, his pen tapping aggressively against the desk.
EB.
I replied, a slow, calm smile across my face. "But I'd much rather be ungrateful and respected than loyal and underpaid." The silence in the room was absolute. It felt like the air had been vacuumed out.
Finged.
He leaned back, his fake armor of corporate confidence starting to crack. "You'll regret this move," he muttered, trying to sound like a threat. I highly doubt that, I said, gathering my final files.
You told me to try harder last year, Todd.
I did exactly that. I just didn't do it here. With that, I turned around and walked out of the office for the last time.
Beam.
The following 2 weeks were a bizarre transition period. Todd spent most of his time avoiding my desk, acting like if he just ignored my departure, it wouldn't be happening. But my team, they were incredible.
Easy.
As news spread that I was jumping ship to the Airborne Defense Integration Program, coworkers started stopping by my cubicle in the shadows. "Good for you, man," one whispered with a genuine nod of approval.
Fate. About time.
Someone stood up to him. Another added. Even Kevin, the guy who had landed the promotion I was passed over for, pulled me aside near the exit. "I wish I could follow you," he confessed, his voice low and bitter.
Me locked into a contract.
"And I hate every minute of it here." By that final Friday afternoon, the reality had settled in for everyone.
The office was deathly quiet.
The energy completely drained, as if people were mourning the loss of the only person who actually kept the systems running.
For the first time in my career.
I wasn't the guy rushing out in shame. I was the guy everyone was watching with a mix of envy and respect.
4 o'clock.
Sharp, I unplugged that piece of junk printer I'd been fighting with for 3 years. I left it right in the center of Todd's desk with a bright orange sticky note. I wrote for visibility.
Dramatic resignation speech. No bitter emails. Just a clean professional exit.
As I walked through the parking lot, I waited for the sound of Todd's footsteps behind me, hoping he'd offer something, anything to keep me.
He never came.
The man who had spent years telling me I wasn't ready for a promotion couldn't even manage to say goodbye. My phone buzzed the second I turned the key in my ignition. It was a text from Lisa at my new firm.
Background check cleared. Welcome to the team.
Orientation is Monday. I sat there for a long moment, the engine humming, watching the gray, miserable building in my rearview mirror.
Place had sucked the life out of me.
But now it was nothing more than a tiny dot in my past. I drove away with a smile on my face, not because I felt like I had won a war, but because I was finally truly free.
Busey.
A year later, I barely recognized the version of myself that had worked at Aerodyne. My life was finally balanced. No more middle-of-the-night emergency calls. No more fabricated urgent meetings just to boost someone's ego. No more emotional blackmail about working weekends for the family. My new bosses treated me like a human being, not an asset to be exploited.
Eid.
If a project hit a snag, we sat down as a team and brainstormed a solution instead of hunting for a scapegoat.
You.
I had gone from fighting for scraps to leading my own technical team, managing budgets, and mentoring engineers who actually valued my input. The salary?
Fact.
It was exactly what they promised, and light years ahead of what Todd had ever offered, most days. I clocked out at 4:30, grabbed a nice dinner with my family, and still had enough energy to actually enjoy my evening.
Beam.
The chasm between being used and being respected is wider than the ocean. Then one Thursday morning, an email popped up from Ben, an old coworker from my Aerodyne days. The subject line was simple. Guess who's in trouble?
Be seen.
I opened it, and the first line made me laugh out loud. Your old boss is absolutely losing his mind. The system you built, it crashed completely, and nobody has a clue how to fix the architecture.
Bing.
Apparently, the company had tried to land a massive government contract using the same tech it designed from scratch. But since Todd was too cheap to hire anyone competent to maintain it, everything folded mid-delivery.
Few.
The Air Force was breathing down their necks, and the deadlines were unforgiving. Later that afternoon, while I was reviewing some design specs, my phone buzzed with an unknown number.
He almost swiped to ignore,
But curiosity got the better of me.
hello? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Hey, it's Todd.
I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, a slow, satisfied grin spreading across my face.
Wow, Todd. Fidgy.
I haven't heard from you in a long time. What's going on? He cleared his throat, trying to regain his command, but he just sounded desperate. Yeah, listen. We've hit a snag with one of the legacy systems you left behind.
Fee here understands the configuration. and the client is absolutely livid.
I was hoping you could maybe come back and help us out. Just walk the team through it. I couldn't believe my ears. Same guy who told me to try harder was now begging me to save his skin. I don't work for you, Todd, I said, my voice ice cold. I know that. He snapped, his desperation rising.
Foundation, and no one else can stabilize it.
I would really appreciate it if you could just try harder this year. Todd, I replied smoothly. The line went completely dead. What? He finally squeaked.
Me, I said, leaning forward.
You told me to try harder next year, remember? Well, I did. Now I think you should try fixing it yourself. Before he could muster another word, I hung up,
Sat there for a minute.
staring at the screen, feeling like a massive weight had been lifted off my chest. Maybe it was petty, but this wasn't about revenge. It was about finally closing a chapter that had been hurting me for years.
Few weeks later,
Ben sent me one last update. Todd's been demoted, he wrote. There was a massive fallout with the client and management pinned the whole disaster on his poor leadership.
he isn't even in engineering anymore.
They moved him to some back office project in corporate limbo. I didn't even bother to reply. I just stared at the project board in my office, feeling entirely at peace.
Fix.
When I met Captain Rise during a follow-up review call, he looked at me and said, I'm glad to see you ended up exactly where you belong. That sentence stuck with me for the rest of the day, because he was right.
Future, I did belong here.
I wasn't chained to someone else's insecurities anymore. I wasn't wasting my talent to make a mediocre man look like a genius. I was finally the architect of my own future. Where you belong. 3 words echoed in my mind like a rhythmic pulse for the entire afternoon. He was right in a way he never intended. I did belong here, but not in that suffocating cubicle.
Bruton.
And certainly not under the thumb of a man whose only skill was masking his own deep-seated insecurities. I was done wasting my intellect, my drive, and my potential just to polish someone else's tarnished reputation.
Thing.
That evening, I decided we needed a change of pace. I took the family out, not for anything extravagant, but for a simple, quiet dinner where the laughter felt genuine rather than forced.
Beats.
My wife, always perceptive, asked if I had heard any whispers from my former workplace. I took a slow sip of water and nodded, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Yeah, I replied calmly. Todd reached out a while ago.
Fiend.
Help with a project, I added. She let a sharp, incredulous laugh that cut through the noise of the restaurant. You didn't actually help him, did you? I looked her in the eye and shook my head, my expression firm.
You dot.
He got exactly what he earned. Todd spent years convinced that keeping me small, keeping my contributions hidden, was the secret to his own power.
Fool.
All he really accomplished was making my eventual departure and subsequent success impossible for the industry to ignore.
Feud.
Now, every single time my paycheck hits my account, the one that reflects my true market value can't help but drift back to his cramped, dim office.
Miserable afternoon.
When he looked down his nose at me and patronizingly suggested I try harder next year, and every single time that memory surfaces, I smile because I did try harder.
For I just didn't do it for him.
I did it for me, for my family, and for the life I finally get to build on my own terms. YouTube has just rolled out this brand new hype feature, and it's a total game changer. You've been gripped by this story. Do me a favor and smash that hype button. It's the best way to tell the algorithm that this content deserves to reach a wider audience.
Think.
And it helps ensure that even wilder, more intense stories keep finding their way to your feed.